thought that my world had ended. I thought, there's no way they're going to let me back in a church building. I was born in the Plains area, and my mom and dad divorced when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And the first time I knew that there even was God, that Jesus existed, I was about 8, and my mom had moved back to Abilene, and we were at home alone with our dad. And we were left at home alone a lot just because he was a cotton farmer and he was gone all the time. And I didn't realize how poor we were, or that we were poor at all, until a man and a woman knocked on our door. And it was actually 2 men, 2 women, knocked on our door, and they had their arms loaded full of groceries and had just tons and tons. They filled our pantry, they filled our refrigerator, they filled our freezer, and just loaded us full of groceries and told us that Jesus loved us. And they kissed me and my sister, and out the door they went. And looking back now, I remember the night before, all we had left in the refrigerator was a package of hot dogs and a small jar of French's mustard, and that was all that was left. And that was what we were going to have for supper that next night, was the same thing, cold hot dogs and French's mustard. And it was the first time I ever had orange sherbet, and I thought I was just on, cloud 9. I'd never had anything quite like it before. But that was the first time I ever heard, that Jesus loved me. Years later, we moved back to Tuscola area with my mom and my stepdad. And when we moved there, Mom worked 2 and 3 jobs just to try to help out. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that, she had brought 2 kids into this marriage, and my stepdad didn't have any children. So I think she felt obligated to try to provide more. And so we would a lot of times take care of the housework and get to play on our bicycles and play outside quite a bit. And so one afternoon, we were riding our bicycle around town as usual, and a little old man, a little old woman in a dirty, beat-up station wagon with no air conditioning and just the grumpiest faces, they stopped and they said, "Hey, we're having pizza at our church this evening. If you'd like to come have pizza with us, we'd love to have you." And so that was it. Pizza did it. So I went home and we called and we begged our mom. We're like, "Mom, please, oh please let us go to church. It's just 2 blocks over. We don't have to cross any major highways. Please let us go." And she asked if we'd done our chores and if we'd gotten everything done. And I begged her and said yes. And sure enough, she came home and it was all done so we could go. And so we went and had pizza that night. And from that point forward, that church just adopted us. We were there every Tuesday night for visitation, every Wednesday night for service, every Thursday night for visitation, on and on, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, always somebody had us. And that church really raised me and my sister, and they loved us. My stepdad was an alcoholic. And so a lot of the times he would do things intentionally, like he would leave the porch littered with beer cans so that on Wednesdays and Sundays when these people came to get us, they would literally kick through beer cans to get to us. And I always felt like those men were like our heroes, because here they were, never shamed us, never made us feel bad for having to wade through beer cans to come get us, and they would do it. And I tease now and say that, every one of the men that drove that little tiny church bus were these gigantic men that were just like superheroes. And my stepdad was a really little guy, and so I remember him beating on our bedroom wall, just going, "Hurry, hurry, hurry. Before they get up on the porch, I want you out of here. Come on, girls, get ready, get ready." And, I have lots of crazy memories and lots of great times at that church, and lots of good people that loved on us, that fed us, that, did things that they didn't have to do. I never knew that church camp cost $1. I never knew that a church shirt cost $1. I never knew that the Sunday afternoon meals cost anything, because they never relayed that to us. They never made us feel like we couldn't go, because if it had come down to money, there's no way we would have been able to go. But they never, ever did that. They just loved us. They loved 2 little ragamuffin girls who a lot of times came to church not clean, not in the latest fashion by far. I can remember kicking off my jelly shoes in Sunday school and looking at the crisscrosses of dirt on my feet, and nobody said a word. They just loved on us. And it was the most unconditional love that you've ever seen. I mean, I look back now, and they really had a hand in raising and making me who I am today. But you fast forward, when I was 13 years old, they took us to a camp in Minnetonka in Oklahoma, and I heard God for the first time as loud as possible, and accepted Jesus as my Savior in that church camp on a middle of the week service, and came home and was baptized in a stock tank and raised in that church. When I was a junior in high school, something happened. One Wednesday afternoon, went to church like a normal Wednesday, and they asked all the young kiddos to play outside, and they asked the youth to kind of watch over them as they had a meeting, a meeting for the church body. And so we were playing outside, and the next thing I know, you hear the eruption of screaming and hollering going on. And they fired our minister in that meeting and never said a word. And there were a lot of us kids. When they fired the minister, they also fired our youth director, all in the same big bang. And this church split. And when the church split, it left a lot of us ragamuffin kids that were not secure in their foundation with Christ, not secure yet, still young and green, dangling. And I was one of the ones that was dangling. And so, without a place to run, without a way to ask, without a way to do anything, I just kind of turned away from all of it and kind of ran from everything. And that being said, my senior year, I wound up losing my fiance, the guy that I was going to marry. He was killed tragically in an accident. And then the next thing I know, I blink, and I was pregnant. And when that happened, I thought that my world had ended. I thought, there's no way they're going to let me back in a church building. There's no way that I'm going to get to grow up and marry that godly man now. I have ruined everything. I have ruined my chances. I'm just strapped with the scarlet letter. I mean, you read the book, Nan. You know that this is what happens, that you're done. You'll never get back in that place. You'll never teach a Sunday school. You'll be lucky to be allowed to sit in the back row if you're lucky. And that's kind of the way I felt. And so I ran from God. I ran from everything doing with Him, having to do with Him. I kind of just drifted. And about the time that Bryce reached first or second grade, and he and I were doing something together, and I realized he didn't know who Jesus was. I realized he'd never even heard a Sunday school song, that he'd never played any of those Sunday school games, that he didn't know the books of the Bible. I mean, all these things that I had learned, at 10, 11, 12, and 13, he was not getting it all. And so I really tried to look for a church home. And it was hard because I still felt like everybody in the room was staring at me. And like I didn't have a right to be there, and I didn't have a place there. And it was hard to do. And so I prayed and I said, okay, God, I know that if I'm destined to be alone, help me find the right church home that's going to love me as a single mom, that's going to love Bryce. And I kept looking and I kept looking, and I was like, okay, so none of it worked. And so finally I said, okay, God, am I meant to have somebody? If I'm meant to have somebody, Bryce is getting ready to be a teenager. It has to happen now. If I'm going to find that guy, it's going to have to happen now. And so I started praying for him. And I started praying to God, okay, God, I'm not going to date. I'm not going to look at guys. I'm going to wait for you to send me who I'm supposed to have. And within about 3 or 4 months, Buddy and I were introduced. And one of the first words out of his mouth and my mouth was that we were looking for somebody who was also looking, to follow Christ and change life and to do the right thing and to raise a godly family. And he's totally from a different aspect than I am. So he has the same mom, he has the same dad. They went to this church. He grew up in this church. This is his home. It never changed. Not to say that his walk is perfect, because it wasn't, but he had that strong foundation his whole upbringing, never a church that split or divided or anything. So we moved here. Just before we moved here, God has a funny sense of humor, so we start looking for churches and we start doing home church. And so we kind of decide that's what we're going to do, because he works Sundays and I work Sundays and we both work Wednesdays and we don't have a set schedule. And so we start home church, and with home church, Buddy brings Bryce to know the Lord Jesus. Buddy helps lead him to Jesus, and amazing time. I mean, I was blown away. It was like God had answered all my prayers. Here it was, here's my baby coming to know Jesus because of the man that I loved, and who knew that could happen. And so that we trek along for a while, and this couple comes into the restaurant, because that's what I do for a living. I manage a restaurant, and in managing the restaurant that I've been at, I have held every baby that ever walked in the door forever. That's my thing. I love little people. And so I'm carrying babies around. Well, this couple comes in that's come in for a long time that foster, and they're an older, more well-to-do couple. And so I've held lots of babies that they've had. So I pick up their babies, and I'm carrying their babies around the restaurant. Well, one afternoon they walk in the door with a little girl. And the little girl is slick bald-headed and has a broken arm. And she's 4 months old. Very tiny little girl. She's underweight. And I can tell that she's been pretty badly abused. And so I pick her up and I hold her like I've held every baby, and lightning shoots through my body. And I'm like, God, you have a sense of humor. And I hand her back to the couple. And I'm thinking, there is no way on earth. Here I am. I've barely been married a year. I've got a 10-year-old or 12-year-old at this point. There is no way. And so we float around, and every afternoon, about once a week or twice a week, they're in the restaurant. That's normal. And I bring out their food and try to stay away from them. And the second that I deliver the food, she goes to screaming. And I'm like, well, I can't let them try to hold her and eat a hot meal. And it's quiet, and there's nobody in the restaurant usually when they come in. So I pick her up, I hold her again, lightning. And I'm like, okay, God, all right, you win. I'll go Google it. So I Google it up. It's $50,000 to adopt. By the time I have $50,000, God, she's going to be 18 and gone. So there's no need for you to do this, and I'm having a physical argument with God. And so I give her back, and God does the coolest thing. He sends a foster to adopt family in the restaurant for 3 weeks straight. 3 totally different foster to adopt families, 3 totally different scenarios, 2 couples I've never seen again. And so the last man that showed up is a state weightlifting judge from Dallas area. And he shows up, and I sit down next to him, and his phone rings, and I'm like, oh, Kurt, you got to get that. And he's like, yeah, I got to get it. So it's my kid. And so he answers the phone, and I walk away, and I come back, and I said, so what'd the teenager do? Because this guy's like 55 years old. He said, it's not my teenager, it was my 1-year-old. And I said, without hesitation, you have a 1-year-old? And he said, yeah, it's kind of a funny God story. I said, what kind of funny God story? And he said, my wife is a retired school teacher, and she begged me to do fostering. We were licensed for 24 hours and got a call about a baby addicted to meth. Little boy, brand new. We went and got him from the hospital, brought him home, and he spent every night on my chest. And this dude's a big weightlifting guy. And I said, okay. And he said, at 6 weeks, they came in to do a permanency plan and permanency placement. And Kirk said, he's in his permanent place. And they said, well, he comes with a 3-year-old sister. And he said, well, get her stuff packed and get her over here. Let's get her going. And that was the end. And I said, all right, Kirk, level with me. My whole life, I understand that fostering is really expensive. I said, no, didn't cost me $1. And I said, time out. It didn't cost you $1? He said, no. I said, all right, the adoption, that was expensive. He said, $500. I said, what? He said, yeah, it cost $500 for a name change. He said, that's all I paid for. I've got friends that are attorneys. And I thought, wait a minute. I have friends that are attorneys. I've been out here for a long time. So I make a phone call to my friend who's an attorney. And he said, yeah, I'll help you do it. When you have to get licensed to foster and And then once you've fostered for 6 months, then you can legally adopt. So I called the couple that has Carmen. And I said, hey, this is what's on my heart. And they were like, well, it's about time because we've been praying hard for you guys. And I thought, wait a minute, you've been praying for us? He said, yeah, we didn't want her to go anywhere else. And we thought, man, who loves her as much as we do? And watching you with her, we knew that you guys loved each other so much. And so I said, okay. So we went home. I went home and I thought, okay, God, here's where the kicker is. Buddy is so private. There's no way he's going to let me foster. Because CPS is invasive. They're in your lives. They're in your home. He's going to say, no way. And so I remember driving in the driveway and literally walking up the steps going, God, are you ready? Are you ready for him to tell me no? Are you ready? This is what's going to happen. I'm going to walk in here and he's going to say no. So I walk in the front door and I just blurted out. I'm like, buddy, God has put it on my heart that we're supposed to foster adopt this little girl, and CPS is invasive and they're going to be in our face and they're going to do everything. And he goes, okay. And I said, wait, time out. Why'd you say okay so easily? He said, I can see how much you love her. And if you love her that much, I'm going to love her even more. And that was it. We got Carmen. It wasn't a super easy battle. It wasn't a super easy struggle. There were lots of ups and downs, but the second that things would kind of turn right or turn left and not be perfect, I would just stop and we would pray, and all of a sudden God would open 10 doors and we'd just kind of walk right through and nothing would be difficult again. So recently we've been trying for the last 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, to try to have a baby, and it has not worked out and things have not gone so smoothly. And so Buddy said on a car ride home from Dallas shortly after his foot surgery, he said, I really feel like we should just foster again. And I said, no, you're crazy. We're not going to foster again. And I said, God would have to make it so perfect. And I said, and that won't happen. I said, I can't have Carmen pulled in and out of the situation. I can't have her exposed to a baby and having a brother or a sister and then have them taken out of our home and break her heart. I can't do that. God would have to call himself, say this baby is yours, and make it so perfect. Well, we were licensed to foster. We had only talked about it. We had accepted an application from an agency in Brownwood, but the application had sat on our TV stand, and we had done absolutely nothing about it. And so I got a call in November, and the caller said, there is a baby who needs to go to a permanent placement. There is no family, no kin that can have him. This will be the mom's 4th removal. And she said, will you take him? And I, without hesitation, said yes. And then I picked up the phone and called Buddy and said, hey, guess what I just said yes to? And he said, amazing. And so it took us a few more months than we thought it would, because of course this is Thanksgiving and then Christmas and then New Year's, but we eventually took home baby Zane, and it's been amazing. It's not been the easiest ride, but it's going to work out just fine. God has a plan. About 3 years ago, the lady who was in charge of cooking for our church program, our Wednesday night program, became ill with cancer. And so there was talk about moving it to like a light snack only, things that could be thrown into a paper sack that the kids could eat quite quickly, and then not doing a full meal anymore. And God really yanked at me. He didn't just barely, it was loud, very loud. And he screamed and he said, stand up right now and say you'll do it. And I did. I just jumped up out of my seat and said, you can't discontinue the feeding. Please don't do that. Please don't do a light snack. The kids won't come anymore. And I know that because I was that kid. I think that if there had not been that reason for coming, the physical need of being fed, then I never would have been fed spiritually. And I needed both. I know now I needed both. And now as an adult, of course, I come for the spiritual feeding. But these kids that are in this community, they need the physical feeding too. They need somebody to know that they love them. They need to know it by the way we treat them, by the way we feed them, by the way we love on them. I would not be doing what I do today here at our church had somebody not done it for me. And they did. They loved on us and they fed us. And that's all I want to do now. I want to give back exactly what was given to me, if not more. You know, I want these kids to know that they're loved. I want them to know they're valued. I want the young ladies to know how to act like a lady. I want the young men to know how to act like young men. And I think that our church and that we as Christians have the ability to teach that and to love on these kids and to feed them. And I think it'll come back. I know it comes back because look, it comes back. You know, I'm not perfect and God's still working on me. You know, that old Sunday school song, you know, to make me what I ought to be. But I'm hoping that we just continue to do this. And I'm hoping that God continues to provide, and He has. We've had so many, you know, with the restaurant that I work in, I've had so many donors just walk up and pay for things. I was in Sam's one day and I was loaded down with 3 Wednesday nights worth of meals on a cart. And I was approached by somebody that was in the restaurant and they said, what in the world are you doing? And I shared with them our Wednesday night ministry. And as I went to check out, they handed their credit card over and took care of the bill. And so there are still people out there that want to give, that want to love on these kids. And I think it's important that we continue to do it.